Hey guys, so in this video, I'm going to be focusing on our third lesson, which is another method to actually solving quadratic. So what we've been doing is solving by factoring. This is completing the square. And just before we get started, we're going to do a little review. So go ahead and pause the video and do these 3 review questions that you see up top, and then we'll continue on and see if you're good to go. And here we go. So for the first one, you are multiplying x plus 4, but notice how that's raised to the second power. So think about that, right? If this is my base, x plus 4 being raised to the second power, then that means I have x plus 4, but times itself, x plus 4. So now I can go through and do the box method and solve. So I've got x plus 4 and x plus 4. So here is x squared, here is 4x, and 16. Then, of course, we have our like terms to combine. So in the end, we have x squared plus 8x plus 16. So then for the next one, you're having to factor, right? So what factors multiply to get you 9 and add to get you 3? Well, 3 and 3. 3 times 3 is 9, and 3 plus 3 is 6. So you have x plus 3 times x plus 3. Now notice it looks a lot like what we did over here in the first example, right? So I could also write this as x plus 3 to the second power because they're both the same. So then the last one, same thing, right? What 2 numbers multiply to get you positive 25 and add to get you negative 10? Negative 5 and negative 5. So here I can write this as x minus 5 times x minus 5, or just like our previous example, because they're both the same, x minus 5 to the second power. So now looking at these 3 that we just did, or you also did on your own, what pattern do you notice about the B middle term and the last term C? So here, when we're looking, well, I notice that my B here, so my B here was 6, right? And my last term 9 here, but we ended up with positive 3. So same thing. What do you notice here? Our B was negative 10. We ended up with negative 5, right? And then in the end, that C is positive 25. So if you notice the pattern, here we're always taking that B term, right? And notice how we're halving it. Because, well, so let's say, for example, with this one, well, what is half of our B? 6. Well, half of 6 is 3, which is what we ended up with when factoring. But then what do we do to get 9? Well, we don't multiply by 2, right? We square it. So what is 3 squared? 9. So check that here, right? So we're saying B is negative 10, and we're going to divide that by 2. We're halving it, right? That gives you negative 5, which is what we got here factoring. So then what would I do with a negative 5 to get positive 25? Well, if I square it, what is negative 5 squared? Positive 25, because that's negative 5 times negative 5. 2 negatives when multiplying make a positive. So in the end, remember that rule when completing the square. We're going to take that B term, that middle term, and we're going to half it and square it, all right, to get that third term here, or to get our C. So just like what we talked about, and what we're going to do is we're going to do some examples on this slide and practice to get that third term, to get our C. So remember, right, what are our steps? We're going to take our B. So what is our B in this first one? 14. We're going to take that 14, and what are we going to do? We're going to divide it by 2. We're going to half it, and then we're going to square it, okay? So in this case, I have 7 squared. So then what is 7 squared? 49. And then how do we write that? As the perfect square, x plus 7. So notice how, right? What 2 numbers multiply to get you 49 and add to get you 14? 7 and 7. And notice how? There's our 7. So let's take a look at example B here. So B is negative 4. So again, here I'm going to take -4, I'm going to half it and square it. So half here, you get -2, and -2 squared is +4. So same thing, right? What two numbers multiply to get you that +4 and add to get you -4? -2 and -2, which is exactly what we got here when halving. So that's why when we write as that perfect square, because we need to practice that too, we're going to write it as x minus 2. So C is a little different, but still the same. What is our B? Well, B here is 5, right? So again, what do? Half it and square it. Now half is 2.5, right? So 2.5. 2.5 squared, you should get 6.25. Now, if you're like, oh man, then I have to figure out what numbers multiply to give me that add. Well, remember, what's our trick here? Notice how whatever we get from halving our B, that's what we end up with squaring. So x plus 2.5 or 2.5 to the second power. So go ahead, pause here, do D on your own. What's that C? And then how do we write it in that perfect square form? And here we go. So notice how our B is 20. So again, you should have halved the 20 and then square it. Half of 20 is 10. And then what's 10 squared? 100. So you end up with 100 to finish the completing the square. That means what goes inside of our parentheses when writing? X plus 10 to the second power. So now we're going to actually go through, guys, and solve our equation. So here, just keep in mind, when completing the square, we need to make sure that our x's stay together. So see how our x's are here? But notice how -20, our C has no x. We're going to move it over to the other side. So let's go ahead and add the 20 to both sides. So I'm going to rewrite this now as x squared plus 8x. We need to complete the square, so I'm going to leave a blank. Then that is equal to 20 now because we added the 20 to both sides. So now we're going to solve by completing the square. We're going to take that b, which is 8, right? And what do? We're going to half it and square it. So half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to take that 16 and I'm going to add it to both sides, right? Because what we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to both sides of the equation to keep it balanced. Now on the left side, we need to write this as our perfect square. So if I notice I have both positives, I need x plus. Well, x plus what to the second power is going to give us this trinomial? X plus 4. Because 4 and 4 both multiply to get you 16 and add to get you 8. And then remember, here we got our 4 from halving B. Is equal to not 20 anymore, right? But 20 plus 16, which is 36. Now we're going to solve for x. But the opposite, notice how we have to the second power. So here, that opposite operation, we're now going to take the square root. So when we're taking that square root, now it's opposite operations. They're going to cancel out. And now I'm just left with bring down the x plus 4. Now here's the trick. The square root of 36 is not just 6. This is positive and -6 because 6 times 6 absolutely is 36. But technically, what is -6 times itself? -6. Well, two negatives when multiplying make a positive 36. So don't forget this positive negative symbol. So really, if we wanted to solve this by completing the square, we have two separate equations. We have x plus 4 is equal to 6, but we also have x plus 4 is equal to -6. Now we go through and solve both equations for x. We're going to subtract the 4 from both sides. So here you get x is equal to 2. Here we're going to subtract the 4 again, but notice how this is -6 minus 4, making this -10. So you get 2 and -10 when solving. So now let's go to example 3. So go ahead, what would be the first step? Subtract the 21. Good. We need to move to keep our x's together. So I've got x squared minus 10x, leave the blank to complete our square, is now equal to negative 21, right? Because we subtracted the 21 from both sides. Now we can complete the square. We're going to take our b, which is negative 10. We're going to half it and square it. So here we get negative 5, right? Half of negative 10, and then square it. Negative 5 squared is positive 25. So I'm going to add 25 here to both sides of my equation. So now when we're solving, right, because we had to add to both sides to keep it balanced, remember on the left side, now we're going to write this as a perfect square. That's the whole purpose of completing the square. So here we've got x and then what? Minus 5. Notice how now we have that negative, oop, I forgot my x here, negative 10x, so we do need a negative now. And then we also, that pattern, right, we have that negative 5 here, so negative 5 squared. Then on the left side, or I'm sorry, on the right side, negative 21 plus 4, or 25, gives us 4. So now to solve for x. But notice, right, we've got that squared again. So what's the opposite of squaring? Take the square root. So now they are opposite operations. They're going to cancel out. And x minus 5 is equal to the square root of 4. Well, that's not just 2, right? Remember, that's positive and negative 2. So we have two equations that we are going to solve. We're going to solve x minus 5 is equal to positive 2, and x minus 5 is equal to negative 2. So now we can solve for x. I'm going to add 5 to both sides, and x is equal to 7. I'm going to add 5 to both sides, but be careful, right? Because now that's a negative 2 plus 5, which gives you now 3. So the answer here is x is equal to 7 and 3. Now this one, notice example 4 is a little different because see how before in 2 and 3, a was just equal to, oops, I'm sorry guys, a was just equal to 1. Notice how in example 4, a is equal to 2. So this one's a little different. But first step is not going to change. What do we need to do first? And if you were thinking subtract that 22, you got it. Move that 22 to both sides, right, to keep our x's all together. So here we've got 2x squared minus 16x, then leave some space here, is equal to negative 22. Now, we truly cannot complete the square until x is equal to 1. But notice how to get 1, we do have a GCF. They both 2 and negative 16 have a common factor of 2. So we can go ahead and take that 2 out. So 2 now, really, dividing that out, you get x squared minus 8x. And let's leave that blank here, is equal to negative 22. Now we can complete the square. So notice how we have negative 8. So now we're going to take that negative 8. We're going to half it and square it. So here I've got negative 4 squared, and negative 4 squared is positive 16. Now here's the trick. We said what we add to one side, we had to add to the other side, but we're not going to add 16 because here's the reason why. See how we're multiplying everything by 2 here? So we need to multiply that 16 by 2 as well. That's what we add to both sides. So I'm not going to add 16. I'm going to add 16 times 2, which is 32. Now we can go through and solve. So now here I've got 2 times. We need to write our perfect square. So how are we going to write that? Well, x, notice how we have a negative here. So minus, and then 4. Very good. So that's going to give you your negative 8 and multiply to get you positive 16 is equal to, now adding negative 22 plus 32 is positive 10. Now we're solving for x, but notice we're multiplying by 2. So we have to first get our parentheses by themselves before we take care of our squared. So first, we need to divide by 2. If we're multiplying by 2, divide by 2. So now I've got x minus 4 squared is equal to 5. So go ahead and pause here, finish solving, and let's see if you get what x is equal to. And here we go. So first off, now that, see how the x minus 4 to the second power is all by itself, now you can take the square root. So here I've got x minus 4 is equal to positive negative. Now, can you take the square root of 5? No. So guess what? You should have just left it as the square root of 5. So positive negative square root of 5. So here we're just now going to take that 4 and I'm going to add it to that equation, to both sides of the equation. So here I've got x is equal to 4 plus the square root of 5 and 4 minus the square root of 5. Now, for good practice, you can also just write this as, keep it all together, 4 plus or minus the square root of 5. That is what x is equal to. So now here are the U tries. Pause the video, try these on your own, and let's see what you get. And here we go with number 1. So that first step, you needed to add the 84 to both sides to keep our x's all together. So x squared plus 8x, leave the blank, is equal to 84. So when you take that b of 8 and half it and square it, you get 4 squared, which is 16. What you add to one side, you add to the other side. So now when I write my left side as the perfect square, you should have gotten x plus 4 squared. And that is equal to 100. Now we can solve. See how it's by itself? So I can just go ahead and take the square root because that's our inverse operation. And x plus 4 is equal to not just 10, right? But positive negative 10. So here you should have solved x plus 4 is equal to 10 and x plus 4 is equal to negative 10. So now when you go through and solve, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. So here you get x is equal to 6, subtract 4 from both sides, and here you get also negative 14 from negative 10 minus 4. So number 2, what's nice is the 15 was actually already over to the other side. So all you had to do now is just take that b, which is negative 2, half it and square it. Half is negative 1, and negative 1 squared is positive 1. So x squared minus 2x plus that 1 is equal to 15, but don't forget to also add that 1. So now remember, right, on the left side, writing this as a perfect square, you should have gotten x minus, because of the negative, 1 squared is equal to 16. Then again, inverse of squared, take the square root of both sides. Now I've got x minus 1 is equal to not just 4, but positive and negative 4. Your two equations you should have solved were x minus 1 is equal to 4 and x minus 1 is equal to negative 4. So now when we solve, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. You get x is equal to 5, and when you add 1 to both sides here, you get negative 3 from negative 4 plus 1. Number 3. Now this one, remember, right? We need to keep our x's together on the left side and then our constants on the right. Now notice how we have 2 plus x over here. So I need this x to move over. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract the x from both sides. So now I've got x squared plus 14x plus 15 is equal to 2, right? Because we subtracted the x from both sides. Now notice we need to keep the x's together still, so now subtract the 15. So here we've got x squared plus 14x, leave that blank, is equal to negative 13. Now to complete the square, take your b, which is now 14, half it and square it. Half of 14 is 7, 7 squared is 49. We add that 49 here to both sides. So now when you write the left side as a perfect square, you get x plus 7. Notice how both signs were positive. Here, when you combine your like terms, you get 36. Now again, x plus 7 to the second power is by itself, so take the square root. When they cancel out, you have x plus 7 is equal to not 6, but positive negative 6. So now I'm going to go through. When you solve, you should have x plus 7 is equal to 6, and x plus 7 is equal to negative 6. So now when you solved, you should have subtracted 7 from both sides, and you get x is equal to negative 1. Subtract 7 from both sides, and you get here negative 13. So now question number 4. Notice how, right? Keep the x's together. You should have added the 46 to both sides. So now I've got 7x squared plus 14x, leave the blank to complete, is equal to 42. But notice how we have 7, right? Not 1. So I'm going to take out and divide out my 7. So here you get x squared, and then what's 14 divided by 7? 2. So now I've got 2x. Leave the blank to complete the square is equal to 42. Now we can continue with taking our b, which is now 2, right? Not 14. Half it and square it. So now we've got 1 squared, and 1 squared is just 1. But remember, we don't add the 1 to both sides, right? Because we're distributing that 7, you do need to multiply. So 7 times 1 is 7. So make sure to add that to both sides. So here on the left side, you have 7 times x plus 1 to the second power. So we're writing that perfect square, but don't forget the 7 is equal to 49. Now we can go through and solve, but notice, do we square root first? No. You have to get rid of this 7, but it's multiplying, so opposite is division. Divide by 7. So now I've got x plus 1 to the second power by itself is equal to 7. Now you can take the square root here of both sides. They cancel out and you're left with x plus 1 is equal to, now can we take the square root of 7? No, and you can't even simplify it. So just leave it, positive, negative, square root, of 7. So really now the last step is subtract that 1 from both sides. And then here you could write it as the 2 separated, or you can leave it as negative 1 plus or minus that square root of 7.